My story is one of growing up in a Christian home and being taught Christian principles, going to a Christian school, being exposed to Christian things throughout my life. I thought I was following that walk until I got into this situation in my mid-40s where the world took me away from all that and brought me into a space where I was like, hey, this is pretty fun, not realizing the consequences that it was having on my life and your life and the family's life.
Gregg and I met in high school, and we got married when I was 20 and he was 22, and we moved around a lot when we were first married. It was fun. We saw it as an adventure, a way that we could meet different people, different places, and our kids rolled with it. And it got to a point, they got older, and we had an opportunity to move back to Holland, Michigan. And so we did, and we thought, okay, now we can settle here.
And it just tore my soul. I mean, it was just really, really difficult. I think you really, really wanted to stay, but I got to the point where I wanted to leave. And so an opportunity came up for us to move to Milwaukee, and I became a vice president for the first time in my career. And of course, that was a big deal to me, and it wasn't a great time for us to move, and Sheri didn't want to miss our daughter's senior year. And so we lived apart. I was not in a church environment, so I had no accountability. The lifestyle of the people I worked with was extraordinarily appealing. It was growth, it was exciting, dinners, alcohol, socialization, it was overseas. What I discovered is that when people travel overseas, the rules kind of change. It's like, hey, what goes, goes, and we live with the rules of what happens in Europe or China or wherever we were going. It just was a really difficult time in our marriage. It didn't stop for me. The career didn't stop for me. The opportunities didn't stop for me. So the conflict between you and I just continued to escalate. I buried myself in more work.
I buried myself in the kids.
That's where we got to where I was just spiritually dry at that time because we had zero accountability. We had no one speaking into our life. And it culminated in an event where I was in church and again, thinking about the life I was living, and the pastor started preaching. And I have never done this in my life, and I haven't done it since. I stood up, I walked out of church, and I told Sheri I'm never going back. I had just absolutely given up on church.
And he walked out, and I'm like, what's going on? Is he sick? I went out, and he was already gone in his car.
I would say a few months went by, and I remember one flight I was on, I looked in the mirror and said, I don't know who you are. And it was painful. It was really painful for me. And it culminated probably 3 to 6 months later. I took an Uber to the airport in Chicago. I was walking through the terminal, and I was headed to Barcelona, and I was going to be gone for a week, and I knew what was going to happen. You know, the drinking and the alcohol and just the socialization that would go on. I was in a terminal where there was a Y, and I stopped. It was either the Holy Spirit, it was just this jolt that I felt. I could not go on any further. So I went up to a desk and I said to the attendant, I said, I have to have my bag back. I said, I have to go home. I have a family emergency. I rented a car. An hour later, I'm on the road and I'm headed back to Milwaukee. I just remember crying out to God, and I was crying, and I'm not necessarily a crier. And I remember driving into the driveway, and I didn't even have my keys. I had to ring the doorbell. And I'm standing at the front door, and I'm looking a mess, and Sheri gets to the door, and she goes, what's wrong? And I said, I just have to tell you the life I've been living.
It really came out of left field for me. I had no idea at all. And I was angry, I was frustrated. I couldn't understand it, but probably within 24 hours, I just said, I need space. Called a couple that are best friends, and they came over, and I just poured out my heart. They heard it all, and they listened, and they were patient. And then when I was kind of done, couldn't say anything else, very quietly and lovingly, the husband said, Sheri, there is hope, because I just saw divorce as the only way. And he said, there is hope. This isn't hopeless. I'm like, yes, it is. Gregg and I can talk about that. You know, we're not on the same page. We weren't in the same chapter. We weren't in the same book.
Yeah.
We were two very different lives. And it just was so evident to me. And I thought, there's no way that this can work.
I think as we look back on it and we think about the steps we took, whether it was the counseling and it was the classes we took to understand what your needs are and my needs, part of it was we moved. We moved into a new house. We moved downtown. And we
got a new job.
I got a new job. I got out of the job I had. Each step of the way that we took was an important step. Sometimes we took steps back, no doubt. In addition to that, we had to find a new church.
We visited a few different churches in Milwaukee, and I sat there in church and I'm like, wow, this feels like home. This feels really good. Both agreed wholeheartedly that it was the right place.
That church was instrumental in helping us in our walk. That began our understanding of how to serve together at church.
Yeah.
And in serving together at church, we grew closer together.
That was what we needed for our marriage. We needed to get back on the same page.
Yeah.
We needed to be in the same book, in the same chapter, on the same page.
We need to be in the same boat.
And find out that there are things that we can do together that we enjoy. And we got in a small group there, and it was a small group that was authentic and real.
You know, without Jesus in my life, it was empty and meaningless. I was scared. I confessed my sin, course corrected my life, sought help, and recommitted my life to Christ.
And it wasn't until my believer's baptism, I mark it at that moment when I realized what it meant for Jesus to be the Lord of my life. You can't describe the feeling unless you've been through it. And for me, being baptized, which I thought would be just a simple act, became a true moment that I still reflect on. And I went to all the baptisms after that, and we stay for all the baptisms at Harvest because we understand how important they are to people, just how incredibly important those moments are and how memorable they are, much like when you get married or much like when you have your first child. These are moments that you just can't describe to people unless you've been through them.
And for us too, it was a point in our marriage where we were feeling that we were in a much better place and that God had really redeemed our marriage. You know, when I think back to when I thought there's no hope for us, and to think where we are now, it is amazing, and it's truly God.